What's up, guys? Today we're going to be talking about another person in this book, Getting There. It's a book that was released this year, and it is an amazing book about many very successful people. Basically, how it's done is that there's about 4 or 5 pages on each of these successful people that this author has interviewed. And these people span all across the board, and they're all in different industries, but they have made their name, made a lot of money, and become very prestigious at what they do. So today I want to talk about one specific person. Her name is Stacey Snider. You may not recognize that name, but she is the co-chairman of 20th Century Fox. That's a big deal. That is a huge deal. 20th Century Fox is responsible for a lot, um, a lot of entertainment, and it is she's one of the top dogs, and her being a woman is quite fascinating herself, um, and I can't tell you how interesting her story is. So let me just tell you a bit about her story. It's very fascinating, and for her to be at the top and be able to do this, it's quite amazing. I mean, 20th Century Fox is responsible for so many things that I would love to be a part of. Anyhow, so she starts off with her story about how she was raised, how her father uh, died, and how her mother had to take care of her. Her mother died at the age of 19, but by that age, she had already given a huge influence on her, taught her about feminism, always encouraged her, brought her to these women's rights campaigns, told her to read these books about female sexuality and female rights, and obviously that influenced her and fueled her immensely and allowed her to become the woman she was. She believed that she could make it, and this was incredible because this was a time, of course, where many women they had a psychological bias, or for whatever other reason, they believed that they couldn't, and they thought that they really couldn't make it anywhere because uh, at the time equality was still trying to come about, and most women didn't have um, the opportunities for jobs that men did. So again, it just reminds you about how times are changing and how not long ago things were very different. And I think it's a very exciting time to be alive, because of the opportunities. Especially if you're watching this video, you probably have many opportunities. And so it is also very interesting because uh, as far as this book goes, let me just talk about this book in general. The more I read about, not just in this book, but the more I read and learn about these people's journeys, I start to realize how they are very much like a lot of us, lost in our journey, trying to find our passions and following a course of action, and things don't work out. It's very easy to get jealous or resentful of the people who just luck out. They find their passions early, and from then on, it's just an easy pathway. They want to be a doctor or a lawyer, and they follow it, and they get into school, and they love what they're doing, and eventually they finish school and they become a lawyer, and they love their practice, and that's what they do for the rest of their lives. The more and more I read about it, the more I realize that people don't have, life can be convoluted at times, and things don't always work out for a lot of us. But if you just, you know, start setting a plan, start figuring out what you like doing, start moving towards things and putting your ego aside and working towards things and being patient, you can get there nonetheless. Um, and again, there's so many stories that are popping up that remind me of this. One is obviously Anderson Cooper's story, which I did a whole video on, and another is this man who gave Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer. If you guys don't know who those people are, Bill is the richest person in the world right now, and both people are people who started Microsoft, which is a very profitable company and responsible for a lot of the internet and computers. But this is a man who started his own company, and he gave Bill and Steve their first jobs. And eventually, what happened with him was his life is very interesting as well. He's dead now; he's passed away. But basically, he always wanted to be a doctor, and he ended up going into, I believe it was the army for a while, because of tough times and because he was financially strapped. And afterwards, he got into the technology business. He started a very, very profitable technology company, which he eventually sold for a lot of money, millions. And then, after all that, when he was like 30 years old, he finally was able to become a doctor. So he went to med school again. Again, a lot of people. That's another thing. A lot of people are. They have these limiting beliefs or excuses, such as, I'm too old now to go back to school, or I can't make it now, I'm too old, or it's over. And he didn't have that belief. So long story short, he went back to med school, and then by the time he was 40, he finally became a doctor, and then he set up his practice in this little rural area that he lived, and he did it for another 60 years and loved what he did. Not 60 years. He did it for another like 30 years, and then he passed away. So it was it was a very interesting story about how he chose to do what he loved, and I guess that was becoming a doctor. Even though he had millions of dollars already, that he ended up pursuing his passion, and it was to be this small town country doctor. So it is very fascinating. Anyhow, back to this woman's story, Stacy Snyder. So, this is her story. She went to law school because her grandfather and her father were lawyers. Her mother wanted her to just be successful and not follow in her footsteps, because her mother didn't make a lot of money and depended on her father, which she eventually divorced. And she didn't want that for her child. So she didn't really care what employment Stacy got. So Stacy decided to follow law. It seemed to be the natural path. So she went to UCLA Law School, and she pretty much studied law, and in her free time, on her summer breaks and so forth, she got her jobs or internships at the stereotypical lawyer jobs. So what she did was she clerked for a federal district judge, interned at a big Manhattan litigation firm, and a boutique firm in LA. And all of a sudden, she started feeling really weird. She describes it as a kind of malaise, ennui, and impatience with my workday. And she was just so surprised and uncomfortable because these were so uncharacteristic that she really got scared, and she really got into self-exploration. And I'd like to add that while she was doing this, she also wrote coverage synopsises for screenplays for film production companies for $50 a shot. And in her time in college, she waitressed. So it was very fascinating. And it's very fascinating for me because it just goes to show you that she was on her path, but things weren't seeming right. It's very characteristic and of a lot of people as well as myself, and I think it's one of those things where it's just like, wow. Anyhow, what did she do next? Well, she went to a college professor, and then she just really was confused. I think a lot of people are confused, and it just reminds me of myself and a lot of other people. And her professor told her to write down the things that she enjoyed doing. So immediately she wrote down reading, because even to this day, if she goes 5 or 10 minutes without doing anything and she's not reading, she feels anxious. So she wrote that down, and here's where it's something that's, again, very characteristic of me. She said, well, how can I possibly make a living reading? That's just ridiculous. So her professor explained to her, well, you're doing just that. You are making a living reading by evaluating screenplays, and you should see how that unfolds. What's the next step that you can follow with that pathway? So for what? So I guess the lesson from that is that you should realize that reading can span many different areas and many different pathways, and you can use that and be creative and think of a way where reading may be able to branch into a potential career pathway. I know there's this YouTuber, his name's Tai Lopez, and he reads or tries to read a book a day, and then he does a summary on that book on YouTube, and he's generated a following and a business model off of that, where he makes money from speeches and paid products and paid services on his website through that. So it is very fascinating. So here's where it gets interesting. She had a crossroads. She was out of law school and she had a choice of choosing a salary at a law firm or something else. And this was a very fascinating thing. Again, it's a very recurrent theme I see among successful people. The one that comes to mind is the man who started LinkedIn and another technology startup company. He's worth over $1 billion now. I forgot his name, but he's a very fascinating individual. Peter Thiel. He wrote this book, 0 to 1. He's also very fascinating because he doesn't own a car. He still uses Uber, which is interesting. He's not famous so that people don't recognize him and know that he's a billionaire. And so he just uses Uber to get around. He doesn't own his own car. And what's fascinating about him is how he started his businesses. But regardless, the point is, it reminds me of him because he gave a lot of advice. And one of the pieces of advice he gave was, I can't remember if it is actually Peter Thiel who said this, but it was one of those technology startup guys. He said that if you have the choice between a learning experience that will get you further and a job that pays more, go with the learning experience. And it wasn't just him who said this. There's another person. I read this on CNN.com. What was his? I forgot his name, but now he's a very successful human. He's like a very successful CEO of a company. And he said that when he started out, he had the choice between choosing a job that gave him a lot of learning experiences in the field that he wanted to get into, which was human resources, and choosing a job that was not in human resources but paid a lot more. And he ended up choosing the HR job, and again, he was given that advice by his father, and it ended up paying off for him because of those learning experiences. And he obviously climbed up the ladder and so forth. So she was in a similar crossroads. Guess what she did? She chose not the law degree job, but the best job she could in the entertainment industry, which happened to be an entry-level job in the mailroom of Triad Artists, an LA-based talent agency. So that implies two very important things. The first being the fact that she put her ego aside and she went for menial work in the mailroom, which is a lesson in itself. Again, reminiscent of a lot of different stories that I remember. There's this book called Life is What You Make It by Peter Buffett. He is the son of Warren Buffett, billionaire, one of the richest people in the world. And Peter, he had a friend who started in the mailroom and worked his way up through many years to be the president of I think it was a magazine publishing company. What's interesting about his story is that he was vice president for a long time and he loved the job. And then he was offered presidency. And he was too tempted by the money and he took it. And the problem was, it turns out he hated the job because as a president you have all these different responsibilities. Whereas as vice president, you love the job and so forth, and it was more about the money. It was about the stuff that he did for the job. And so the lesson behind that story was how You know, you can't always take the promotion for money. Um, and it was a big mistake, and he regretted taking that promotion because there's a lot of stuff he did as the vice president that he loved, whereas as the president, he had completely different tasks and responsibilities. And so it is very fascinating. It's not always just about climbing the corporate ladder. Anyhow, back to this story. I keep getting off track, but again, these are all great lessons. The second best thing about this is how she chose to do this because she realized that if she took the route and became a lawyer and worked there, she would have gotten used to the money, used to the lifestyle, and gotten trapped there. And that's a huge lesson for a lot of people. They take the money, they take the salary, and then they get bills, and then they get used to the lifestyle. They get used to spending money on these things, and because of that, they are obliged or obligated to remain there because of the salary, because of uh, the the bills that they have to pay. Now, this isn't everyone, of course. Some people, they have connections, they have the ability to transfer to different areas. Maybe they even have the willpower to quit their job if they wanted to or cut down on their expenses, but that's not everyone. A lot of people, they get trapped in their employment because of the salary, and then they end up hating their job, and then they're stuck there. And again, it's not everyone. Some people luck out once again, and they love their jobs. So she didn't want that though, and so yeah, she took this job, and again, needless to say, it was a very menial job. She was photocopying, she was pushing the mail cart, delivering mail, running packages, and delivering scripts. But she loved it. She loved her job, and there were times where she asked herself, "How can I have all this education